Hi guys, and welcome to our how to play video for Warcradle's card game Fog Friction Western Front, a World War II card game for 2 players. To begin with, we're going to take a look at the types of cards you'll be using in your deck. There are 2 types of cards that make up a player's deck. The first one is the battlefield card, and your deck will contain 5 of these. The starter box contains 10, 5 for each player. These are the areas that your forces are trying to capture. Capture 5 of these and you win the game. The other type of card is the force card. The starter box contains 74 of these for each player, 50 core and 24 expansion. The decks the players will be using in this video will be customized 60 card decks chosen from the core and expansion cards. The force cards come in 4 different types, which you will be able to identify by the colour of the ribbons on the cards. The red ribbon cards are your frontline cards, and these are the heart of your force. They come in 2 different types, infantry and armour. Next are the support cards. These are the blue ribbon cards and are used to support your frontline cards. They come in 3 different types, artillery, air and defences. The green cards are your logistics cards, and they come in 2 different types, supply routes and reinforcements. These cards will help you replenish units or draw extra cards. Finally, there are the purple cards. These are the fog and friction cards. These cards may be able to change how the battle is progressing or throw a spanner in the works of your enemy's plans. Now that you know what the different types of cards are, we'll take a look at the anatomy of the force card and what everything printed on there means. The first thing is the unit type. For example, on a frontline card, this can be either infantry or armour. Next is the ribbon colour. This denotes the type of card, as explained earlier. Following on from this, you have the fight strength. This is the type and amount of damage that the unit has to take to change the state of the card. Number 4 is simply the nationality of the card. The game has 2 nationalities, Allies and Axis. Next is the special rules symbol. This corresponds to any special rules text printed on the card. Number 6 are the medals. For frontline cards and artillery support cards, these indicate the amount and type of damage that the unit will inflict in the combat phase. For defences support cards, these indicate the amount and type of damage the card will prevent during the combat phase. And for logistics cards, these represent the amount and type of reinforcements that will be available in the logistics phase. Number 7 is the unit image. Number 8 is the special rules text. This will correspond with the symbol from number 5. And finally, number 9 is the unit name. Now we come to the layout of the table. During a game, different cards are placed in specific positions according to their role, which you will see from this diagram. Number 1 is the battlefield deck. These are the as yet unused battlefields. Next is the battlefield card that is in play at that time. Number 3 are the frontline slots, followed by number 4, which are the support card slots. Number 5 is where any fog and friction cards that are in play will sit, and number 6 is where any logistics cards will sit. Number 7 is the player's force deck, and number 8 is the discards pile. Finally, number 9 is the battlefield victory pile. Now it's time to see how all this works in a game. We have 2 players, Aaron and Simon. Aaron is playing the Germans and Simon is playing the Allies. As mentioned earlier, each player has a deck containing 65 cards, 60 force cards and 5 battlefield cards. These decks contain the cards from the basic deck plus the expansion cards. Both are available in the starter box. To begin with, each player shuffles their battlefield cards and places them face down in the appropriate position. Next, they draw the top card from their battlefield deck and place them face up in the centre of the play area. These are the battlefields each player will be fighting for, in this case a river and a city. In order to give the players a chance to start fighting in the first round, they are allowed to take a small personal force of 2 force cards into battle. Each player should look through their deck of force cards and choose 2 cards that will be added to their opening hand. The cards can be frontline, support or fog and friction. They are not allowed to take a logistics card. Also, they cannot exceed a fight strength of 1 and must have no special rules. Once both players have chosen their 2 cards, they reveal them to their opponent. They then put them to one side and shuffle their force deck, which they then place face down in the appropriate position. They must then determine who is the attacker and who is the defender. The attacker will be going first and gets an extra 2 cards in their starting hand. However, this means the defender will know where best to place their defending forces. You can use whichever method you prefer to decide this. In this case, Aaron and Simon chose to roll dice, with Aaron winning the roll and choosing to be the attacker. Each player will now draw their starting hand of cards, adding them to the 2 cards that they previously chose. The attacker will draw 6 cards and the defender will draw 4. Each game round has 4 phases: deployment, combat, capture battlefield, and logistics. So the first phase we will look at is deployment. The deployment phase has 2 rounds of deployment, first deployment and second deployment. As Aaron is the attacker, he will go first, and he chooses to deploy his 2 Panzer IV cards, one to each of the battlefields. Next, Simon has his first deployment and chooses to deploy his Hellcat to the city and one of his Sherman cards to the river. One special rule that you should be aware of is if you don't deploy any forces in the first deployment, you can't deploy any in second deployment. For his second deployment, Aaron commits the Panzerschreck to the city, the Pak-38 to the river, and the camo position support card to the Panzer IV that is already at the river. Simon then commits his second Sherman card and both Typhoon cards to the river and the Quad 50 cal AA card to the city. There is just one more rule you should be aware of when it comes to deployment. Artillery and defences support cards must be attached to a frontline card and can only be deployed directly behind an occupied frontline location. Anytime they become unattached, they are automatically discarded. However, air support cards are not required to be attached to frontline cards and can be deployed to any empty support location. Now we come to the combat phase of the round. Combat is performed in the following order: anti-aircraft, ground targets, artillery, and finally frontline. So the first units that would need resolving are any that can be used as anti-aircraft. To do this, each player should add up the air damage of their deployed frontline and support cards. Air damage is the value on the right hand middle, as is pointed out on the screen at the moment. As Aaron is the attacker, he would be going first, but at this time he has no cards in play that have an air attack value. Simon has a Quad 50 cal AA card deployed to the city, which could be used in this step, but unfortunately there are no air targets available. The good news for Simon is that the quad card can also be used in the artillery step if it has been unable to attack in the anti-aircraft step. Next we have the ground attack step. Again, Aaron would normally be going first, but he has no air support cards in play. Simon, however, has 2 Typhoon cards at the river, so he will attack with those. In order to attack, Simon has to decide to attack either Aaron's front line or support cards, and decides to attack the front line. He then adds up the infantry damage total of all the cards being used, and then the same with the armour damage. In this case, it gives Simon a total of 4 armour and 1 infantry. Aaron then compares these 2 totals to the fight strength of his deployed cards. Fight strength is the amount of damage points needed to either deplete or destroy a card and is shown in the upper left corners, as you can see on the screen right now. The 1 infantry damage isn't enough to match the fight strength of either the Pak-38 or the camo position, so can't be applied to either of them. The 4 armour damage can only be applied to the Panzer IV card. However, the supporting camo position card reduces the damage by -1. This means it will take 2 damage to deplete the panzers. Depleted cards are turned 90 degrees and cannot add their damage or use their special rules in any later combat steps. This still leaves 2 armour damage left to assign. As there are no other targets to apply them to, they will have to be assigned to the panzers. This destroys them. This also means the supporting camo position will become unattached. Both cards are moved to the discard pile. As there is no ground attack to be resolved in the city, we will now move to the artillery step. Again, Aaron is without any units in play that can attack in this step, but Simon has the Quad 50 cal in the city that has the special rule mentioned earlier. This lets him use the air damage value as infantry damage in the artillery step, if he hasn't already used it in the anti-aircraft step. This gives him a total of 1 infantry damage, which Aaron assigns to the Panzerschreck unit, which depletes it. Finally, we come to the frontline combat. Aaron attacks first with his Pak-38 at the river. His total armour damage is 2, which when applied to Simon's frontline forces is enough to deplete both Sherman cards. As the Shermans have been depleted in this step, they can still return fire. Simon adds up the damage caused by the Shermans and gets a total of 2 armour and 2 infantry damage, which is enough to deplete the Pak-38. In the city, Aaron attacks with his Panzer IVs, which causes enough armour damage. However, Simon then attacks back with the Hellcat, using the first armour damage to deplete the Panzer, then the second to destroy it. That is all the combat for this round finished, so now we move on to the logistics phase. As neither player has any reinforcement or supply route cards to play, they now draw reserves from their force deck. Each player will draw 3 cards. Although this won't be the case right now, a player's hand can never exceed 8 cards. If they have more than 8, then they must discard the excess. In the draw, Aaron added Tiger and MG42 frontline cards and an outmaneuvered Fog Friction card to his hand. Simon added Browning HMG and Riflemen frontline cards and a Truck Convoy logistics card. Logistics cards have to be played immediately, so Simon places it down on the table in the card slot as shown earlier. Following the deployment rules as described earlier, Aaron deploys his MG42 card to the river and supports this with the Flak 38 card he drew at the beginning of the game. Simon then deploys his Browning HMG card, also to the river. Aaron finishes off his deployment by deploying the Tiger card to the river and his Panzersparwagen to the city. Simon then finishes the phase by deploying his riflemen to the city. Now we're back at the combat phase again, beginning with the anti-aircraft step, and Aaron as he is the attacker. At the river, Aaron totals up the air attack value of all his frontline and support units, giving him a total of 2. Simon has to apply this total to any air cards in play. This depletes both of his Typhoons. This means they will not be able to attack in the following grand attack step. Neither player at the river has any more air cards deployed, so there will be no grand attack step at this battlefield. Also, there are no artillery support cards in play either, so we will go straight to the frontline step. Aaron decides to attack Simon's front line. He totals up the infantry and armour damage of all of his full strength front line and support cards. Depleted cards cannot add their damage to the total. He has a total of 2 armour and 3 infantry. Simon has to assign Aaron's armour damage to each of the Sherman cards as there are no full strength armour cards in play. This destroys them both. This also means the 2 Typhoon cards have become unattached, and whilst full strength air cards do not have to be attached to frontline cards, depleted ones have to be immediately discarded. He then assigns 1 infantry damage to the Browning HMG card, depleting it. But as there are no other infantry cards deployed at this battlefield, he has to assign the remaining infantry damage to the same card, which destroys it. The Browning will still get to attack back though and causes 2 infantry damage, which can only be applied to the MG42 card. This destroys it. This has completed the combat at the river. As Aaron is the only player with forces still deployed at the river, he has successfully captured that battlefield and places the battlefield card in his victory pile. Any forces still deployed at this battlefield are moved to the discard pile. Aaron then draws a new battlefield from his deck. We're going to leave this game now, but hopefully you now have an idea of how this game works. We've only looked at the core elements of the gameplay, and there is still a lot more for you to discover yourselves as you play the game. But if you have any questions, please ask them in the comments and we will do our best to answer them. If you found this video useful, then please give us a like and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.